Susie and Natalia, right over here. All right, welcome. This is the session about future mobility changemakers. My name is Sandra Phillips. I'll be your guide. It's a bit of a mix of a keynote and a panel, just to make it interesting. So I'll be joined in a little bit. But first, let me start who I am. My name, as I said, is Sandra Phillips. I run an organization called movmi. We're focused on shared mobility with the main objective to change behavior and how we move around. We do this in 3 ways. First, we organize workshops and e-learnings for smaller municipalities. Cities like Vancouver, where I'm from, or Paris, have staff that are dedicated to the digitization of transportation, but smaller communities often don't, and they struggle figuring out how it fits in. So we do that. Second piece we do is we co-create services, and really co-create them for the local conditions, because not every city is the same and they have different needs. And then the last piece, and I'm excited to bring you a bunch of these change makers, we source and scout specifically for change makers that are female and run businesses and companies in transportation. Let me ask you this. Close your eyes for a second. Think about how you, your family, your neighbors get around where you live. Now open your eyes. Who had some sort of image like this, where there was some sort of either spaghetti network of highways, which is where I'm from, there's a lot of that, a lot of parked cars that you walk by with your little daughter to daycare, or you just sit in a car. Who had some image like that? Raise your hands. I'm in Europe, obviously. In North America, it would be every single hand. So what's the problem with that? Well, there's 3, really. First one is, if you drive and you pay $1 to use the infrastructure or put gas in your car, society pays $9.2. Those are Canadian numbers. If you use public transit instead, they only pay $1.50. So we over-subsidize cars on a road in a lot of ways. Problem with that focus is also that we focus so much of our attention in making sure that people sitting inside the cars are getting around safely, quickly, efficiently, and we forget about anybody else who's not in the car. And I have a picture there which looks like a kind of a mountain. It's a very sad story, actually. In Canada or in British Columbia, we have something called the Highway of Tears, where in the last about 10 years, 80 indigenous women were murdered or went missing. You're probably asking why. Well, because they cannot afford a car. It's a very remote rural area, so they hitchhike. Perfect terrain for predators. And the last one, I think that's the one probably everybody in this room talks about a lot, is our greenhouse gas emissions. In Canada, it's over 1/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions are produced by personal vehicle travel. Now, what we don't talk about is how many people die prematurely because of that. In Canada, it's about 15,000 that die because of lung cancer or asthma. So for the first 10 years of my career, I'm like, let's just build more of the shared mobility services, give more people access, build a lot of projects. We do micromobility, like because it's green, it's a small vehicle. We do car sharing because decades of research have shown that one car share vehicle removes between 11 to 25 cars in a city, which is space you can give back. We integrate public transportation with shared mobility. One of our pilot projects has some amazing output and shows us that up to 60% of mode shift is possible. But I realized there's one key ingredient in this project. And I want to ask you what you think that is. Do you all want to change how we move around? Maybe stand up if you do. Let's just get some movement going. Stand up if you want to change how we move around. All right. Who here thinks that the key ingredient to change how we move around is changing the regulatory framework? So if you do, sit down. If you think regulatory, we got to get the regulators to change the framework, sit down. I'll give a couple other options. So if you think innovation and technology is the key ingredient, sit down. Okay, I have a few other people that are not sitting down. What do you think it is? It's people. It's the people. You gotta have somebody who has the courage. You can all sit down. Thank you for entertaining me. It's people. It's the people in the place that change. And I will tell you a story. Now I'm gonna tell you a story from where I'm from, Canada. The story is called The Hummingbird, the flight of the hummingbird. It's a story that's told all across Americas, in South America just as much as in North America or in Canada, by indigenous people. It goes like this. There was a big fire, forest fire, and all the animals left. The deers left, the foxes left, the hare left, all the birds left, except for one little tiny one. The hummingbird kept going back and forth between the river and the fire, dropping one drop of water at a time. And all the other animals were watching it and were like, what is it doing? Like, it's so tiny, and the fire is so gigantic. So they told the bear to go and ask the hummingbird what exactly it thinks it's doing. So the bear asked, and the hummingbird said, I do what I can. And I think that's the key. We do what we can to change it. And if there's enough hummingbirds, we all become what is called a shimmer, because a flock of hummingbirds is called a shimmer, which I think is a beautiful way of saying, and we actually together change it. So now I brought you, and I'm going to stop talking now, I brought you change makers from across the globe, and I brought some of them in person, they'll join me in a second, but I also brought some virtually. And they will tell you what they're doing and how they're changing transportation. So I'm hoping this is going to work.
At ChargerHope, we are setting the standard for fixing electric vehicle charging stations. And we're doing it two really cool ways. One, we're utilizing technology in order to enable on-demand repair of EV charging stations. And two, we're providing real green jobs to folks all across the United States. I think it's kind of wild that I didn't really understand work-life balance until I started making a middle-class income. And so one of the things that is able to happen when you make good money is that you have time to think about your body and your mind. And so at ChargerHope, we not only pay an equitable wage, but we want to introduce our employees into ways that they can take care of their body and mind. Because we're more than just a paycheck, more than just fixing charging stations. At the end of the day and at the center, we're people.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Locke and I'm the CEO and founder of KidKaboo, a children's rideshare based in the United States. KidKaboo was founded when my children were 3 and 6, and after a few years at home with them, I was going to return to a career that I loved as a reality and documentary TV producer. I had an awesome job opportunity and I thought it would be the perfect time to go back with my kids both in school. I couldn't find someone to take them to school and their activities, and despite what I was willing to pay in an extensive search, that problem continued, and I was forced ultimately to turn the job opportunity down. And I knew in doing so I was, ending a career effectively that I had loved so much. I proceeded to do about 800 drives to sort of learn about the problem, and learned truly how expansive it is across the U.S. and how debilitating it is for working moms and their families. And KidKaboo was sort of founded. Since then, we have built 2 self-developed apps. We've incorporated tremendous safety-enhancing technology into what we do, including like dash cams so that we can watch the rides, monitor the rides, ensure their safety, live GPS, etc. And I hope in doing this, we are able to provide a solution as we grow to moms who need a leg up in leveling the career playing field. I think that is something that is long overdue, and there has not really been a sufficient solution to allow moms to do that and still allow their young children and school-age children to get around.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I'm the founder and CEO of UpGirl. With UpGirl, we want to fight for gender equity and against gender-based violence in transportation, preventing sexual crimes, and providing a safe and peaceful trip to both passengers and drivers through an exclusive shared mobility app for women for now in Chile. UpGirl is positively impacting the transportation ecosystem, providing security and mental health to women, mothers and children, influencing future legislation with a gender focus, and support for small enterprises that bring great solutions to mobility in joint instance with the government in which we have actively participated, opening a workspace which allows generating income and empowering women in historical masculine field, on the quality of life, reducing vehicular congestion and therefore environmental pollution, providing a solution to family mobility which schedules recurring transfer and assign a fixed driver. The status quo of transportation is already in the process of changing, and we are part, and this requires many agents of change who make synergy, social movements, more diversification in the top of power and decision makers, changing governments and companies, technology, and of course the brave and dreamy entrepreneurs who, before having great things, want to do great things and dare to take that first step. And being a change maker and breaking the status quo makes me feel proud and successful, because I learned that success is not given by the results of the product, but rather by fighting and leading the opening of new paths so that others walk an easier and better path.
Biko is a shared e-mobility platform for everybody. We aim to make active travel and sustainable transport an easy choice for everyone, regardless of their age, gender, fitness level, or social status. First mover in electric bike sharing in Australia, we are proud to say that we put our town city, Newcastle, New South Wales, on the global e-bike sharing map at a time when not even Paris or New York had electric bike sharing. As highlighted at the UN Climate Change Conference last year, decarbonizing transport is a challenge that could be achieved only if all countries, vehicle manufacturers, fleet-owning businesses, and the civil society will work together to accelerate the shift to zero-emissions vehicles. Going car-free is the most effective action an individual can take, and also the most difficult one in a car-centric culture and built environment. Behavior change doesn't happen overnight, and it's a huge task, but one that every player in our industry should take. This is why Biko has taken a hyper-local approach, leading community engagement, collaborating with all levels of governments, but also with the private industry, especially around the sustainable urban development, to work how best to integrate shared e-mobility in the city fabric. We also advocate for policy change to adapt to our current trends in transportation. Micromobility, and in a broader context, e-mobility, shall be recognized and classified as transport infrastructure and get priority in public funding as a low-cost, environmentally friendly form of transportation with a positive societal impact when properly planned and designed.
In many parts of rural Africa, there is what I call a mobility crisis. So we are looking to ensure that there is accessible green mobility transport solutions available. I'm Shantha Blumen. I'm the founder and director of Mobility for Africa. At the moment in Wedza, we are working in a community of 6,000. We rent to farmers or women's groups or local civil servants to increase their mobility and improve their lives using off-grid energy and electric transport. Now we've got tricycles being used by rural health workers. They've been conducting COVID vaccinations. We're trying to transition the world to a fairer, greener economy that doesn't leave people behind.
All right, those are the international ones that couldn't travel here. I also have 3 change makers that will join me on stage. Sergio, Susie, and Natalia, please come on up. I'll introduce them while they're coming up, and I'm moving over here. Sergio is joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he used to be Secretary of Mobility and Transport, and he really spearheaded the implementation of Vision Zero in Sao Paulo and reducing traffic fatalities. We have Susie Kalich with Zinj, who was the winner of the Empower Women in Shared Mobility Award this year. She brings a very unique combination of psychology, training, 20-plus year of, I'm hoping I'm not butchering this, ninjutsu, self-defense training, and a certification in trauma support. So she focuses on comes with a very unique background looking at our transportation issues and focusing on technology to solve that. And then we have Natalia Tomiyama. She's the co-founder and CEO of Nuvil, which was the runner-up in the Empower Women in Shared Mobility Award category. And she combines her mechanical engineering background with business to really change how urban logistics works. So with that all said, I'm going to be quiet for most of this. I'm just going to ask questions of you guys. Maybe you can just tell everyone here how you're changing, transportation in your daily work. And I can start right from the right, then I'll start with Susie.
How are we changing transportation in our daily work? So my company, Zinj, is a portfolio company that focuses very much on gender equity and migration. Our product that we work with movmi on is really specific about women's safety in mobility. We tend to break things down to the most simplistic and granular level when we're looking for solutions. Sometimes that can seem like an obvious thing, but that tends to get overlooked. So we also tend to focus on overlooked markets and overlooked issues. What we're doing is providing tools for riders, whether they're in private mobility, public mobility, micromobility situations, or even first and last mile on foot, with the tools that they need to identify a threat or an aggression, to stay safe, to de-escalate, and to continue on their journey. So what we're trying to do is support women specifically in increasing their range of mobility, especially as the world is changing and as economies need to continue growing. We want to be able to provide women those tools so that they can contribute to local and global economies.
Thank you. And I find the approach very interesting. If you read, now I'm blanking on the title of the book, but it's essentially about digital data and women's issue. And the one thing that I found really interesting there is like women don't exactly want another emergency button. They actually want to de-escalate the situation. So I find the approach very interesting because you teach us how to de-escalate ourselves. So Natalia, tell us about what Nuvil is doing.
Hello everybody. Nuvil is a German company. We're based in Hamburg and we are an engineering company. We develop hardware solutions for the last mile. And what we develop is electric trailer that you can use with any bicycle, electric bike, and maybe any other vehicles in the future. And you can also use it as a handcart for pedestrian zones. So our electric trailer is following you automatically. You don't need to make any effort. You don't feel anything, and you can transport 150 kilograms without feeling anything behind you. You can run it on the bike lanes. You can run it on the streets. You can use it in pedestrian-only zones and inside the buildings. So what it does essentially, or where we are now, we are in the last mile delivery, trying to minimize use of the cars, which is unnecessary in the cities like Paris, London, Berlin, and Hamburg, essentially every big cities. And we do it in a sustainable but also efficient way. And what we've achieved last year, and it's a big milestone for us, we won a public tender with the Belgian Post, and we are supplying the trailers to help them to make their last mile delivery more efficient. So how we do, this is basically our contribution. We supply a new vehicle. And if you think about that, there are so many solutions in the city or anywhere else for people transport. There are electric scooters, there are bikes, there are electric cars, but what if you need to transport heavy goods, like really, really bulky, sofa, bed, I don't know, anything which is 150 kilogram, you can't do that. I mean, you always need to have a car. And that's why we thought we connect a trailer to any bicycle that anyone can have, could be a sharing bike as well, and enable anyone to move heavy weights in a very, very densely populated area without making any effort. On a personal note, so we are a startup, we're a company, and we are in a sustainable mobility. So what we've done last year, we decided to move our office to the city center. And it's not it's not intuitive move for a company which is producing, having the production side. But we've done it because we also want to enable or empower our employees, the team, to have more time and to balance better work and life. So it was difficult for us to find a production site in the city center or in the urban environment, but we've done it, and it's also part of our contribution, not only what we do, but also as a company and the company culture to balance the life of our employees, and we hope that many other production companies would see this as a big benefit for the team and the company and consider these changes as well.
Yeah, providing the ability to have the 50-minute city, even if you work in a manufacturing environment, right? That's so critical. And I also think the fact that, you know, we have this love affair right now with the buy now button. I think we all do. And so really shifting the logistical change towards more sustainable modes, I think makes so much sense, especially in dense urban areas. Now, Sergio, and I should actually also mention, Sergio was on the jury, so was one of the judges of the Empower Women in Shared Mobility Award ceremony. So I'm so pleased that we actually get to meet in person because before it was all virtual. Tell us about the work you've done and your focus currently of what you're doing.
Thank you, Sandra. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here, for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm former Secretary of Urban Mobility in São Paulo. Actually, I've been working with urban mobility since 2002. I'm former president of the subway company, the Suburban Trains Company, and former global urban mobility director at WRI. I opened my own company in the last 2 years, and we are working with 3 pillars in Brazil to improve sustainable mobility, to improve road safety, and to improve inclusion and access in our cities. Sandra mentioned in her presentation a very important aspect about the financial crisis in the public transport. Actually, it is the biggest crisis in the history of massive transit. In Brazil, and I think in the rest of the world, we lost, during the pandemic, 70%, almost 70% of the demand. And as our public transit services, massive transit services in general, especially in the South Global, and particularly in Brazil in general, cities and governments are not paying for the public transport. They divided the cost for the users. In Brazil, the public health systems, the public health services, and the educational services are in the same level of the importance in our constitution of the public transport. And we have the free public health services, we have free educational services, but we don't have free public transport services. And as we lost our riders and our passengers during the pandemic, our systems went for a lot of companies in Brazil went to the bankruptcy. Some cities lost its public transport. A few days ago, an important mayor of Brazil, important mayor of a big city in Brazil, called me to try to support him to figure out how to find new sources to reduce the subsidy. This city, especially in Brazil, pays subsidy to the public transport. I started the conversation with the mayor, asked him, Mayor, please tell me how much money are you paying for private car users? He looked at me weird and said, nothing. In reverse, I received 50% of the property tax over cars. I received in Brazil, 50% of the tax are distributed for cities. I asked him, but about the pavement, about the traffic engineering, about the lighting, about the deaths and injuries. You know that 60% of the therapy-intensive care in Brazil are dedicated for victims of traffic injuries. And he stopped and said, I never thought about that. So in this pavilion, I'm sure that all of us are convinced that we need to create a new public transport financial system. And we should ask for the private cars use, as Sandra showed us the negative externalities that the cars are generating in our cities. But outside of this pavilion, people are not aware about that. I could ask you, how much money are your cities paying for private car users? If you go to the website, the São Paulo City Hall website, and look for public transit subsidy, you will find a line in the public budget, around $700 million per year, 5% of the public budget. But if you try to find how much money the cities are paying for cars, you will not find it. The feeling that people have is, it's free. It's no cost for the society. So I think you need to be more creative to try to convincing the decision makers to see how it's important to figure out about sustainable transport, safety, and inclusive cities.
It's so true. I just come back from Luxembourg. We're working on a project, car sharing project with the ministry there, and the colleagues that are part of this project, they're working in the city administration, and they're cleaning up, they're cleaning up 2 neighborhoods of cars. What the main is like they're taking parking away, which people, take for granted. Guess what happened? Literally every single bike in that neighborhood got a slash tire now in those 2 neighborhoods. Like we have this, there's this, we expect it for free, and then at the same time there's this, not even an appreciation. If you want to give it to any other mode, there's this backlash. Like the mayor in Vancouver, when he put in the first protected bike lane, he did it in the middle of the night because it was on a bridge, because he knew that the opposition would block the bridge to get it implemented. So I think there's this challenge of doing this behavior change that we really talk about. That starts on an individual level, and we got to get the information out. I think the other thing, and we talked about this when we had our kind of talk of preparing for today, is we just came out of this pandemic, and right now I really feel with what's going out east, it doesn't even seem so relevant anymore, but at the same time, I'm like, we just came out of the pandemic, and this conversation, was it the accelerator of some changes? Like Paris implemented a lot of bike lanes, Vancouver put up new bike lanes, we took parking away for outdoor patios, which we've been trying for over a decade to install, and all of a sudden it was possible. So is it the accelerator, or is it this great pause that we kind of missed the boat? And so I know we had a long conversation about that, so I do want to chat about sometimes behavior change happens when there is a big change in our life. We move to a new city, we have kids, we start new education, and in my head I was like, the pandemic was a perfect place or in time to do that. Maybe Natalia, I'll ask you first, because we had an interesting debate about that.
The recent events, pandemic, I can speak about the point of view of the industry. It's really interesting because many think that because of the pandemic, the whole topic of the last mile delivery and the parcel increase, it all happened because of that. Actually, it's not really so. There have been trends before the pandemic. The e-commerce have been raising. The numbers of parcels have been increasing into 2018 to 2019 by 20%. And between 2019 and 2020, there was a big raise of 30%, but actually there were trends. We knew that or we already know that by 2050, 70% of the people are going to be living in cities. So we're going to have even less space, we're going to have more online deliveries. The parcel delivery has been increasing because e-commerce has been rising since 2016. And what we also knew already before the pandemic, that cities have to change. And that's why there were many, many initiatives in European cities, including Paris, before pandemic, to change infrastructure. Copenhagen, Norway, Oslo have been already doing it. What pandemic did to us, it became a catalyst. So everything that has been already happening and should be happening in the future accelerated. So suddenly more parcels, suddenly more attention to the city infrastructure, city development, suddenly bigger focus on sustainable vehicles. But in my perspective from the industry, we saw these trends, or not only us, but many vehicle manufacturers, and anticipated this transition from the diesel to more sustainable and electric vehicles, and now hydrogen in the future. So there have been lots of signs before. But I agree absolutely, there has been a behavioral change from the private point perspective. So we didn't have access, or we didn't want to buy food in the supermarket, so we ordered many things online. That's why there are so many smaller company startups that emerged during the pandemic, like Gorillas, in Germany it's Flink, so food delivery or supermarket products delivery. So this has been for sure a behavioral change that would stay because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So in your case, it was a catalyst. Susie, what was it in your world? Because you work with groups that often are underrepresented. What was it there?
Well, I think speaking to what Sergio was saying about a drop in mass transit also speaks to the kind of work that we do. So the solution that we have about women in mobility and their safety in transit is basically using safety cards, kind of like the kind you see on airplanes, providing pictograms which empower women to de-escalate situations so they can just get on with their day. What we've experienced, my co-founder Rithika, who's in the audience, and I, here at Autonomy over the last 2 days, is a really interesting ongoing conversation with various policymakers who keep coming up to us and giving us the statistics we've been using towards them over the past few years, which is 52% of mass transit users or any kind of mobility users are women, and they're no longer using mobility. How do we get them back onto the subway? How do we get them back onto the long distance trains, back into shared mobility solutions, back into or introduce them to new mobility solutions like bikes and scooters, et cetera? One of the reasons that women are hesitant to use mobility of any form is because of the threat of physical violence. So TIER, who gave a talk yesterday, just did a great survey that Sandra shared with me that said that 71% of the women that they surveyed in London and Berlin would be happy to use new forms of micromobility if they had training, if they knew how to stay safe. So our solution actually points to a regulatory solution to change those rules to make it a regulation for mobility solutions to integrate basic safety rules into any mobility app. So what the pandemic did for us is kind of highlight that gap. It made us think about response times. You know, the SOS apps that Sandra mentioned are fantastic because people do want to be able to just press a button and call for help. But you still have to wait for that help to come. That help can be 6 or 7 minutes. Those 6 or 7 minutes can be life-changing, life-ending, life-threatening for so many people. They're really dangerous. So to give people the power to say, in these moments, I can de-escalate, I can keep myself safe, is also a great way to introduce people back into mass transit systems, new micromobility systems, existing mobility systems like rideshare, ride-hailing, as well as simply first and last mile home on foot. So for us, it just kind of highlighted that gap.
I got the signal in the back that we have a few more minutes, so maybe Sergio, I know you talked already about what happened in Brazil with the pandemic, but maybe if you had kind of like a closing remark that everybody should keep in mind about what this pandemic has done, and maybe also what the opportunity is, whether it's a pandemic or not, to come out of this in a different way. What would you say is that?
Yes, Sandra. Yesterday I saw the Buenos Aires Secretary of Urban Mobility presentation, Manuela, and she showed us the numbers after pandemic. We have good numbers. For example, they had 3.7% of the trips made by bicycle before the pandemic, and now 10.2. But we have very bad numbers about public transport and car private use. So we need to act. Maybe it's the most important task that our generation has in public transport work is to recover our passengers in the public transport system. And I think one important point about women and public transport is that in general, especially in the South Global, we have much more men design and planning lines. And they don't consider that these special needs for women, in general, women are responsible for taking care of child. They need to stop before go to work in schools, kindergarten, public health services. And in general, men design lines directly from the neighborhood to the jobs. They don't consider these special needs for women. We need to change it to recover passengers in the public transport.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining this discussion. Thank you for sharing your insights. I will leave you with one remark, coming back to the hummingbird story. I really hope all of you continue being part of the shimmer, because it's not going to be easy. There's going to be slash tires, bike tires, everywhere. But let's continue and create this momentum here. Thank you so much.